The Nocturnal Visitor. Hello friends, welcome to the Horror Ghost Stories. The story begins. The wind howled through the trees, sending a chill through the empty streets. It was the dead of night, and all was silent in the small town nestled between rolling hills. People had long since closed their doors, tucked under blankets, and drifted into sleep, unaware of the creeping darkness approaching. In the heart of the town, an old, decaying mansion stood as a forgotten relic of a time long past. No one dared approach it, for rumors of strange happenings had kept the bravest souls at bay. But that night, something stirred within its walls. Lena, a young woman who had recently moved to the town, lived in a modest house near the outskirts. She had heard whispers about the mansion, tales of flickering lights, strange noises, and shadows that moved on their own. But she was a skeptic, someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. It was just an old house, she reasoned, and the stories were mere superstition. That night, however, as she prepared for bed, a strange sensation crawled up her spine. The air seemed thicker, as if the world itself had paused. The clock on her wall struck midnight, its chimes echoing in the stillness. She stood in front of her bedroom window, gazing out into the darkness, when something caught her eye. A figure stood at the edge of the mansion's overgrown garden. The pale moonlight illuminated a silhouette, a person, unmoving. Lena squinted, unsure if it was a trick of the light or her imagination. But the figure didn't shift. It was as if it was waiting. A shiver ran down her back, but she shook it off, telling herself it was probably just someone playing a prank. But the figure remained. Intrigued yet unnerved, Lena grabbed her jacket and left the house. Her heart beat faster as she made her way down the street toward the mansion. The figure had vanished when she arrived, but the eerie feeling in the air grew stronger. The house loomed before her, dark and silent, its broken windows staring like empty eyes. Lena approached the front door, her footsteps echoing through the quiet night. She placed her hand on the weathered brass handle and hesitated. A sudden gust of wind blew, making the door creak as if inviting her in. Something was wrong, she could feel it in her bones. But her curiosity outweighed her fear, and she turned the handle, pushing the door open. The interior of the mansion was colder than the outside air, and the musty scent of decay hung heavy in the space. The floorboards groaned under her feet as she ventured further inside, her eyes scanning the dimly lit rooms. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs draped from the rafters like forgotten remnants of a past life. The house seemed frozen in time, but there was something off about it. A sense of unease filled the air, as though the house itself was alive, watching her. As Lena wandered deeper into the mansion, a faint sound reached her ears. It was the softest of whispers, like a voice calling her name. Lena. She froze, her blood running cold. The voice was faint but unmistakable. It wasn't her imagination. Someone, or something, was in the house with her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around, but the mansion was empty. Or so she thought. The whispers grew louder, coming from the walls themselves. The very foundation of the house seemed to hum with the energy of something ancient. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the temperature dropped, her exhale visible in the air. She turned sharply, convinced that she had heard something behind her. But again, there was nothing. Then the door to the basement creaked open on its own. Lena didn't want to go down there. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, but the whispering voice continued, pulling her forward. It was as though the house itself was urging her to explore the darkness below. With trembling hands, she stepped toward the stairs, each one creaking louder than the last. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, a damp chill that seeped into her very bones. The flickering light from an old bulb cast long shadows across the stone walls, and the air felt thick, suffocating. As she moved deeper into the basement, she noticed something strange: a small, ancient door at the far end. It was hidden behind a pile of rotting furniture, its edges frayed and warped with age. Lena hesitated but couldn't resist the pull. She approached the door, feeling her pulse race. The whispers had stopped, but an overwhelming silence filled the space, pressing in on her. She reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed against the cold, wooden surface. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. But then, from the corner of the room, a pair of eyes gleamed at her from the shadows. They were pale, unblinking, watching her with an intensity that sent a surge of terror through her body. The room seemed to close in around her as a low growl vibrated in the air. Before she could react, the door slammed shut behind her. She was trapped. The creature's eyes glowed brighter now, and she could hear it breathing heavily, its slow and deliberate steps approaching her. Lena's heart raced as she spun around, looking for a way out. The darkness around her seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in like a suffocating vice. The growling grew louder, more feral, as the creature stepped into the faint light. It wasn't human. It was something far worse. Her mind raced as she backed away, realizing she had no escape. The creature was closing in, and she could feel its presence, the weight of its malevolent gaze. It lunged forward with a terrifying speed, and in that moment, everything went black. Lena awoke with a gasp, her body covered in sweat. She was lying on the floor of the mansion's basement, the door wide open, but when she looked around, there was no sign of the creature. No sign of the darkness that had swallowed her. Had it all been a dream? But as she stood up, a faint whisper echoed in her mind, a voice she couldn't escape. Lena. The nocturnal visitor had found her. And it would never let her go. Lena's heart was pounding as she stood in the middle of the basement, her body trembling. She glanced around wildly, expecting the creature to lunge out from the shadows. But the room was empty. The air was still, the oppressive sense of something watching her lingering like a dark cloud. The whisper in her mind, faint, yet unmistakable, was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed almost worse. She took a cautious step forward, her legs weak, unsure of what to do. The cold dampness of the basement seemed to cling to her skin, and she shivered involuntarily. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized there was something strange about the walls, something that hadn't been there before. They weren't made of the stone she had first seen when she entered, but of something darker, slicker. The smooth, polished surface seemed to absorb the light, giving off an almost oily sheen. Her breath caught in her throat as her gaze fell upon an eerie symbol, carved into the wall. It was faint, but unmistakable, a grotesque design, twisted and ancient. It seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy, as if it was alive. She stepped back, instinctively wiping her hands on her jacket, but the marks didn't go away. There was a sudden rush of wind through the basement, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. The small bulb hanging overhead flickered and buzzed before plunging the room into total darkness. Her senses heightened, every nerve on edge. Then, the whispers returned, louder, clearer, unmistakable now. They were no longer in her mind, but in the air itself, surrounding her, creeping into her ears like fingers brushing her skin. Lena. It was not one voice, but many, layered over one another, speaking in unison. It was a chorus of whispers, old and worn, full of malice and hunger. Panic surged through Lena's veins. She wanted to run, to escape, but every instinct screamed that she was being watched, followed by something unseen. The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows, but no one appeared. She strained her eyes, looking into the corners of the room, but there was nothing, yet the feeling of being surrounded only intensified. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, its loud bang vibrating through the room. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She scrambled toward the door, her hands trembling as she tried to turn the knob, but it was locked. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the house itself was closing in around her. She pounded on the door, shouting for help, but no one came. She was alone, trapped in the bowels of the mansion, with no way out. The cold air grew thicker, suffocating, and the walls seemed to close in even more. A low, guttural growl broke through the chaos, sending shivers of terror through her. The creature wasn't gone, it had merely been hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, it was getting closer. Lena turned away from the door, desperately scanning the basement for anything that could help her escape. Her eyes fell on the strange symbol once again. It seemed to be the only thing that didn't shift or move, as if it had been carved there long ago, a mark of some sort of ritual, of something ancient and dark. A sharp, sickening realization began to settle in her stomach. The house was not just old. It was alive. And it had been waiting for her. The growl came again, louder, closer. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she turned toward the source of the noise, her body frozen with fear. A shape began to materialize in the darkness, tall and imposing, with glowing eyes that pierced through the blackness. It was humanoid, but twisted, distorted, like some grotesque parody of a human being. Its skin was pale, slick, and stretched tight across its frame, its long fingers tipped with sharp, claw-like nails. The creature moved closer, its mouth opening slowly to reveal rows of jagged, yellow teeth. It was hungry. And it had found its prey. Lena screamed, her voice raw and desperate, but no sound left her lips. The creature took another step, its presence suffocating, its eyes fixed on her. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by terror. The whispers had returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices that made her head spin. Suddenly, there was a flash of light, blinding in its intensity, and the creature recoiled, hissing in pain. Lena blinked, confused, but before she could process what was happening, a figure appeared in the doorway. A man, tall and draped in a long, dark coat, stood there, bathed in the light that had seemed to repel the creature. His eyes were dark, cold, but there was something familiar about him, something in his expression that struck a chord deep within her. "Run!" the man shouted, his voice low and commanding. Lena didn't need any further encouragement. She turned and bolted toward the door, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The creature let out a screech, its form flickering in and out of the shadows, as if it were fighting to maintain its shape. But the light from the figure seemed to hold it at bay, pushing it back into the darkness from which it had come. Lena reached the door and yanked it open, tumbling into the hallway beyond. The figure followed quickly, and before she could question him, he grabbed her arm, pulling her into a narrow, hidden passageway. "Don't look back," he warned her, his grip firm but not unkind. "We need to get out of here. Now." They hurried through the passage, their footsteps echoing in the cramped space. Lena could hear the creature's growls, its shrieks reverberating through the walls, but they kept moving, pushing through the maze of narrow hallways that seemed to twist and turn in every direction. At last, they reached a small door, one that led outside. The man opened it with ease, and they stepped out into the night, the cold air hitting Lena like a slap in the face. She gasped for breath, her body still trembling with fear, but the man didn't stop. He urged her forward, moving quickly through the yard and away from the mansion, as if he knew the house would never stop hunting her. Once they reached the safety of the forest edge, he stopped and turned to her. "You're not safe yet," he said, his voice grim. "But you're out of its reach for now." Lena looked up at him, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you? What was that thing?" The man's gaze darkened. "I'm someone who has been trying to keep the town safe. That house, the mansion, it's not just a building. It's a gateway. And that creature, it's a guardian, but not the kind you want protecting you." Lena shook her head in disbelief. "A gateway to what?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the mansion, his face hard with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Something far worse," he said softly. "And now that it's found you, it won't stop until it has you." Lena swallowed hard, fear gripping her anew. The nightmare was just beginning. Lena's mind was spinning as she tried to process everything the stranger had said. Her chest heaved with the effort of catching her breath, but her thoughts were still trapped in the labyrinth of fear, confusion, and disbelief. She stared at him, trying to make sense of the man before her, his dark coat, his sharp, calculating gaze, the air of authority about him. Who was he? How did he know so much about the mansion, the creature, and the terror that had been stalking her? And what was this gateway he mentioned? The stranger seemed to sense her thoughts. He exhaled sharply, as though he, too, was fighting an internal battle. His eyes shifted away from her, toward the towering mansion in the distance, its dark silhouette barely visible against the horizon. For a moment, he was silent, as if weighing how much to reveal. "Not everyone knows about that house," he said finally, his voice steady but with an edge of weariness. "Not everyone should. It's a place cursed by history, a place that's trapped in a cycle, one that people have tried to stop for centuries. The mansion. It's a vessel for something ancient. Something not meant to be disturbed." Lena's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, a vessel?" she asked, her voice shaky. The man turned his piercing gaze back to her, his expression darkening further. "That house was built on a site of power that shouldn't exist in this world. It draws energy from a source beyond our understanding, something that came long before humanity. And the creature you saw, it's not merely a monster, it's a warden. A keeper." Lena blinked, struggling to keep her thoughts coherent. The nightmare she just escaped seemed to be taking on more layers of horror than she could fully grasp. The creature, the mansion, the whispers, it was all connected. "But how? Why me?" Lena whispered, her voice cracking. "Why did it come after me?" The man's expression softened, just a little, as if the question brought back painful memories. "Because the house chooses its victims," he said quietly. "It feeds on their fear, their despair. The creature has been tied to it for as long as anyone can remember, but it doesn't just attack anyone. The mansion senses a weakness, a vulnerability. It knows you. It's been watching you." Lena recoiled, instinctively stepping back, as though the very idea of being known by that thing could contaminate her. Her breath became shallow, her skin clammy with cold. "You're saying that the house is alive?" she asked, barely able to make the words come out. "That it chooses who it wants to take?" The man nodded, his face grim. It's more than alive, it's a manifestation of something far darker. There are forces in this world that we don't fully understand. Ancient forces, older than civilization itself. The mansion is like a beacon, a portal. It calls to people who are susceptible to its influence, people who, in some way, are connected to its curse. I don't know why it chose you, but I suspect it's not random. Lena's heart sank as his words began to settle within her, a dreadful understanding creeping through the cracks of her panic. The house had been watching her long before she ever set foot in the town. It had been waiting for the right moment to make its move. It hadn't just happened to her, it had been waiting for her. So what happens now? Lena asked, fear creeping into her voice again. The man's eyes narrowed as he glanced over his shoulder at the mansion one last time. Now, we wait, he said. Because it won't let you go. Not after it's found you. It's never satisfied with one victim. It'll come for you again. And if it can't get you directly, it will take those around you. It's relentless. Lena could feel the weight of his words settling on her like a suffocating blanket. It felt as though the very earth beneath her feet was shifting, as though everything she thought she understood about the world was suddenly crumbling away. She tried to steady her breath, but the panic kept rising, the sense of doom hanging over her like a storm cloud ready to burst. The stranger's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. Listen, he said, his voice lower now, more reassuring. You're not alone in this. There's a way to fight back. But we need to move quickly. Lena looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. Fight back against that thing? She could hardly believe what she was hearing. The creature had been monstrous, unimaginably powerful. And the house itself, it seemed like something beyond her comprehension. How could anyone fight against that? The man's lips tightened in thought. It's not just the creature you need to worry about, he said, his voice darkening. The real danger lies within the mansion itself. The house is the true source of power. The creature is just its guardian, its weapon. The house feeds on fear. It warps reality. It can bend time. It can twist the very fabric of the world. Lena shook her head, trying to hold on to some semblance of rationality. So what do we do? What's the plan? The man's eyes hardened, his face set in a determined mask. We go back, he said simply. We need to destroy the source. We have to destroy the house. Lena stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. Destroy the house? How? The man hesitated, his gaze flicking to the mansion once more, a dark sorrow crossing his face. It's not a simple task. It will take everything we have. But it can be done. There are rituals. Old ones. Dangerous, but effective. Lena swallowed hard. Her fear was palpable, but a strange spark of hope flickered inside her. Destroying the house. Ending the curse that had followed her here. She had to try. For herself. For the people she had just begun to care about. But the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. Isn't there another way? Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. A way to just leave, run far away from here. The man shook his head solemnly. It doesn't work that way. The mansion won't let you leave. It won't stop until it has you. And when it's done with you, it will move on to someone else. The only way to truly end this is to destroy the heart of the house. Lena's mind reeled as she thought about what that would entail. It was clear that whatever the man had planned, it wouldn't be easy. And it might cost them everything. But deep down, Something inside her had shifted. There was no going back. Not now. With a steadying breath, Lena nodded. Okay. Let us do it. The man gave her a curt nod, his expression hardening again. Stay close. And whatever happens, don't look back. They set off toward the mansion, the cold night air heavy with the sense of impending doom. The wind howled around them, but Lena's thoughts were focused on the house ahead. It was waiting. She could feel its hunger, its pull, beckoning her back into the darkness. And though her heart ached with fear, she knew that she had no choice. This was her fight now. The final stand against a force that had been lurking in the shadows far longer than she could ever understand. The battle for her soul had just begun. The end.